Trixie's Forest Retreat. By Crow's Crow. Chapter 123. Roll. Fear not. Trixie has returned. Trixie shouted while she all but kicked down the sauna door with her entrance. Trixie was rarely opposed to a little bit of an entrance, but the door's hinges must have been particularly well oiled, as the door swung practically without friction and banged against the wall much harder than she had intended. Despite Trixie's reassurance that there was nothing to fear, both Fluttershy and Rarity shot up, startled by her entrance. By the looks of things, Trixie was pretty sure she'd given Rarity something of a heart attack. Trixie was okay with that. Roll with it. Even though Trixie was as startled as every pony else by the noise, she wasn't about to let on that she'd made a mistake, leading her to confidently strut into the room as though it had all been part of the plan. Holding both hooves to her chest, Rarity glared at Trixie. "Are you out of your mind? Who enters a room like that?" While Rarity ranted, Trixie wasted no time in claiming herself a seat in between the two of them, one pointedly closer to Fluttershy. Things were off to a flying start, but then, Trixie's actual concern for what Rarity thought was at an all-time low after she'd overheard how the Mary thought of her. Tilting her head slightly, Trixie put on a face of incredulity as she looked at Rarity. "Who? It's Trixie, don't you remember? Well, they do say the mind is the first thing to go. You know, with age." "Oh, you witch," Rarity said, red-faced. Rather than engage Trixie any further, however, she directed her attention to Fluttershy. "You see, this is precisely what I meant." Fluttershy tried to vanish behind her mane while Rarity and Trixie looked at her. A sizzling splash of water on hot stones subtly reminded every pony that the blue-furred spa pony was also in the room. "Oh, yes," Trixie said while clapping her hooves together. "Trixie meant to bring this up. You were right, Fluttershy." I was?" asked Fluttershy, revealing a single eye through the pink curtain of her mane. Trixie pointedly ignored the raised eyebrow by Rarity and continued on. "Yes. Trixie was just talking with the Eart. With Aloe and Blossom, and they've helped her realize she was insensitive. But, it's all sorted out now," Trixie added with a bright smile. "Isn't that right, Aloe?" "Yes, Miss Trixie, you and Aloe had a discussion," Lotus Blossom gently corrected. "Much was cleared up." Trixie blushed and did her best to ignore the amused look Rarity was giving her. "Yeah, yes. Exactly. Thank you, Lotus Blossom." "Oh, don't feel bad, darling," Rarity drawled with an insufferable smile. "I've heard the mind is the first thing to go." Before Trixie had time to think of a proper rebuttal, she heard Fluttershy speak up. "That's great, Trixie. Don't worry, I used to mix Aloe and Lotus up too," she admitted with a pink blush while she looked over at Lotus Blossom. I think Everpony does that for a while." Trixie quickly forgot all about the little verbal joust between her and Rarity. Fluttershy was on her side, that was all that mattered. Smiling brightly at Fluttershy, Trixie nodded. "Yes, they do look alike, don't they?" Fluttershy looked distinctly less comfortable as she was asked to agree with that observation. Like twins, yes. Exactly." Trixie folded her legs below her as she spoke. Curiously, Fluttershy looked as if a gigantic weight had fallen off her shoulders as she let out a relieved sigh. Trixie wasn't really sure why. So, as Trixie was saying, "She's sorry for saying those things in front of you. She understands now. You'll forgive her, won't you?" Fluttershy briefly shared a look with Rarity. No doubt it had to do with Rarity's earlier accusation that Trixie was never sorry. Her attention quickly returned to Trixie, where it belonged. "Of course. Oh, I'm such a loudmouth. I should have known you were just confused. I'm sorry for blowing up at you like that while you were trying to be open." Sensing an opportunity, Trixie scooted closer to Fluttershy and wrapped her forelegs around the adorable, soft, Mare hugging her tightly. Even while sweaty and clammy from the sauna, it still was the best feeling in the world, just a little grosser. Trixie forgives you. We'll just talk about that again later, okay? Trixie was dying to continue their conversation, but not while Rarity was staring daggers at her. Fluttershy returned the hug, clearly more than happy to put the whole thing behind them. Okay. Although Trixie really didn't want to let go, once Fluttershy pulled back, she reluctantly let go as well. On the bright side, she was still sitting very close to her. And Trixie had no intention of scooting back to her previous place. So, for the time being, she could enjoy her new position. Rarity's left eyebrow crept up as she watched, but she held her tongue. Instead, she directed her attention to Lotus Blossom and requested more steam. Things took a remarkably calm turn after that. As though per some unspoken agreement, the conversation moved on to less contentious topics, mostly between Fluttershy and Rarity. Naturally, it was about Rarity's latest story from her boutique. So, I was in the verge of my deadline and busy stitching the ruby buttons when Sweetie Belle barges in and begins to cry as though her world is ending. Rarity rolled her eyes. Apparently her school is merging their two classes into one. There haven't been enough foals going to it to justify two classes, so that's hardly a surprise. Oh, my. I'm sorry to hear that. But, why was she so upset? Rarity chucked. Oh, the poor thing, she misunderstood. She thought that only one class meant that her class would be disbanded and she'd lose all her friends. It was easy to explain once I knew that, of course, but she was so distraught it took me the better part of an hour to calm her down enough so she could tell me what was actually wrong. The poor thing. It's good of you to take the time to help her, Rarity. Even though you were so busy. She's lucky to have a sister like you. So, everything turned out okay. They did. Oh, you should come by for tea next time and I'll show you. The rubies go so well with the jades, it's just a sight to behold. It breaks my heart to think I'll have to ship the last of them off at the end of the week. Even if Trixie didn't care at all to hear about the snobby fashionist's bragging, she didn't want to fight in front of Fluttershy again. It wasn't easy to hold her tongue, but she was perfectly content to just silently enjoy Fluttershy's company, and ignore Rarity's. Before long, Lotus Blossom announced it was time to move on to the next event. Compared to the sauna, the air in the large circular room they were led to was cool. Fortunately, the bathrobes and towel turbans did a good job of keeping the cold sufficiently at bay to keep Trixie comfortable. In the middle of the room were 3 sparkling clean, pink spare beds. Please, lay down and get comfortable, Lotus Blossom said while motioning toward the beds. Miss Rarity, Quake will be here shortly. Quake? Trixie immediately claimed the middle bed, which earned her an irritated look from Rarity, but no actual retaliation. Trixie ignored her. As a result of Trixie's quick thinking, Fluttershy ended up on Trixie's left and Rarity on her right. No way that Trixie was going to leave it to chance that she'd end up anywhere but next to Fluttershy, even if the beds were spread far enough apart that they may as well be sitting on opposite sides of the room. It was the principle that mattered. Quake is our best masseuse, Miss Trixie. She's very talented, Aloe said, apparently appearing on Trixie's bedside out of nowhere. Gah. Oh. Aloe, right. Trixie looked over her shoulder at the nodding mare. Is that what this is then? Massages? Trixie approves of this idea. Just remembering the massage she'd gotten at the hooves of Fluttershy was enough to elicit a warm purr from Trixie. She didn't think it could get much better than that, but if it was half as much fun she'd still come away satisfied. All in good time, Rarity chimed in, immediately making the small hairs on Trixie's neck rise. After all, Quake isn't here yet, and you didn't think we'd just lay here doing nothing, did you? Actually, Trixie did think that. Trixie is fairly sure the experts, Aloe and Lotus, will be doing all the work. Trixie heard Aloe giggle. A glance to her left showed that even Fluttershy was smiling at her now. The heat from the sauna seemed to come back in Trixie's chest at the sight. While they waited for Quake, Rarity began another conversation with Fluttershy. At least, Trixie assumed so, considering the way that Rarity's eyes were aimed in Trixie's direction, but seemingly peering through her to the mare on the other table. Trixie honestly preferred this over the fake smiles and small talk Rarity had done with her in the sauna. Like last time, it was Rarity that did most of the talking, apparently unfazed by the lack of contribution from any pony else in the room. In fairness, Trixie supposed this was only natural for some pony who expected to carry a weekly conversation with Fluttershy. Once Quake arrived, Trixie found herself surprisingly unbothered by the whole thing. Though, it wasn't so much Quake's presence, as to what occurred after her arrival. Much of the credit for her continued good mood absolutely had to go to Aloe. While Rarity was tended to by Quake, and Fluttershy by Lotus Blossom, Aloe had apparently lucked out and been allowed to tend to Trixie herself. A task which she performed with admirable skill. The sauna hadn't been bad, but it wasn't that different from a particularly humid summer day. However, this was pampering on a whole new level. The massages were just the start. A rejuvenating mud mask and 2 refreshing cucumber snacks came into play a few moments later, though that last one earned her a curious look from the spa ponies, and some mumbles from Rarity. Apparently the cucumbers were Applejack's favorite part of going to the spa. Who knew? Aloe meticulously filed down the rough edges on Trixie's hooves and horn, working away the small chips and cracks that had developed thanks to Trixie's long treks. Although Trixie was convinced she was a stunning beauty either way, she loved the new smooth feeling. However, Trixie's absolute favorite had to be the massage. Perhaps there was something to the theory that even earth ponies had a kind of magic, because Aloe most certainly had magic hooves. Trixie practically melted into the bed while the world took on a warm, fluffy quality. The whole world just felt so perfect while she lay there. It was enough to make her consider that perhaps she had been too hasty. She couldn't even really summon up the energy anymore to be angry at Rarity. If they really did this every week, it was no wonder to Trixie that Fluttershy was so soft to the touch. Unfortunately, all good things had to come to an end, even it was far too soon. Trixie would much rather have stayed, but still she allowed herself to be ushered into the next room. The room was large, much larger than any of the other rooms, and right in the middle stood a gigantic tub that would sooner pass for a swimming pool than a bath. Trixie couldn't even begin to imagine how they heated up so much water, or where it came from. Was the whole place just built around it? While Trixie was distracted, Fluttershy had already slipped into the water. It was then that Trixie noticed something else. It was quiet. Where is Rarity? Trixie asked while she looked around. For the longest time now, she'd been somewhat used to the constant background noise of the white ponies babbling, but now she was nowhere to be found. Fluttershy lifted one hoof out of the water to point to the door they'd just come through. Oh, she's still with Quake. Their sessions are a little longer, and, well, she was a little late, remember? Ah, yes, of course, Trixie remembers. Trixie said while she hastily made her way up the steps to reach the water's edge. What are we supposed to do here? Trixie notices the staff isn't around. Fluttershy gave Trixie a confused look. We just have a bath. Well, not just a bath. I mean, they have scents and soaps and minerals and... I don't really know how it's different. I think it's just a regular bath, with company. As she spoke, Fluttershy clearly became more and more self-conscious about the whole thing, and she kept sinking deeper into the water until it came up to her muzzle. Trixie couldn't shake the feeling that this was a scene straight from one of her more questionable books. Just her and Fluttershy, all by themselves, bathing together in privacy. These types of baths always ended up with the participates becoming more dirty than they started. A fire ignited in her cheeks, and Trixie tried to banish the thought from her mind. She wasn't very successful. It didn't help that Fluttershy somehow still managed to look absolutely adorable, even with wet fur and a towel on her head. Stop it. Trying to clear her mind, Trixie took a step away from the edge and trotted onto something soft. Looking down, she discovered Fluttershy's discarded bathrobe. The fire spread from her cheeks to her entire face. "Trixie? Are you not coming? Is it a problem? That I don't know what this is for. I'm sorry. I could go ask Lotus Blossom, if you want me to." "What? Oh. No, it's fine." Snapping out of it, Trixie tested the water with one hoof, and, finding it comfortably warm, quickly lowered herself into the bath. Whatever it's for, Trixie's pleased to have you all to herself for a while. Alone. In a bathtub. Trixie winked. Fluttershy responded, but her muzzle was so deeply hidden in the water that all Trixie heard was mumbles and bubbles. She grinned. Trixie's thoughts exactly. Chapter 124. Retaliation. After graciously getting a few moments to recover from Trixie's last attempts at flirting with her, Fluttershy broke the silence. "It is nice here. I like to talk with Rarity in quiet places like this." Well, she does most of the talking, but still. "You're a lot like her, I mean in how you like to, talk. But you stopped talking around Rarity all of a sudden, and it worried me a little. Are you okay?" Seeing as Fluttershy was worried, but now recovered from her teasing, Trixie took a spot next to her. The question provoked a deep sigh from her, however. "Ugh." Trixie's sorry, Fluttershy. She thought this would be easier. Maybe this was a bad idea. Given the things she had overheard, Trixie tried to measure out her next words carefully enough that it wouldn't be obvious she'd been eavesdropping. Rarity clearly doesn't want Trixie here. She stopped just short of adding loud, "or with you. She's just a little, well, protective." Fluttershy looked down and rubbed her hooves together awkwardly beneath the surface of the water. "I'm sure she'll come around if she gets to know you better. Can't you try talking to her some more? You got along with Twilight so well after you girls started to talk about magic." "Oh, yes, we got along so swimmingly that Twilight gave Trixie a personal demonstration in magic the following morning," Trixie remarked with more of a barb than she had intended. Fluttershy froze and Trixie raised a hoof to her forehead with a groan. "Sorry." "You're right. Maybe Trixie just needs to find something she has in common with Rarity too. But Trixie isn't sure if she still wants to get along with her." Protective. Trixie supposed that was a fair word to describe Fluttershy's friends. Rainbow Dash, Twilight, Rarity, they all had been merciless when they felt as though Fluttershy was under threat by Trixie. And, if she was honest with herself, Trixie felt the same way. It was just so natural to feel the overwhelming need to protect the sweet, timid mare from anything that might hurt, or take advantage of her. Maybe Trixie will try again. Trixie may have found something we have in common after all. That's great. Fluttershy beamed happily at Trixie, but then quickly backpedaled. "Oh, but, only if you're comfortable with it. I mean, you shouldn't force yourself to if you, would rather try later, if at all. Just do what you want, okay?" Trixie smirked. "Oh, alright, Trixie'll just do as she wants." Right after saying this, she snuck a foreleg around Fluttershy's waist below the water level and pulled her closer. Fluttershy tensed up, but Trixie stopped once they sat beside each other, shoulders lightly pressing against one another. "Is this okay? It's all Trixie wants, today." Fluttershy kept her eyes down at the water, but after a moment she finally nodded. This is okay. It's nice." She smiled cautiously while she looked up at Trixie. "Just this, right?" Trixie could finally breathe easy. "Right." Trixie confirmed with a pleased smile, giving Fluttershy a playful squeeze before relaxing again. "This could work. If Fluttershy was bad at signaling what she wanted and too hard to read, then Trixie would just slowly experiment. Day by day. At last, Trixie had a solid starting point. No more second-guessing her every move. It was obvious now. She could at least be this close to Fluttershy, which was perfect for Trixie. It was likely she would be okay with more, but Trixie resolved not to push Fluttershy too quickly. A few days of allowing her to get used to the idea of nearly cuddling up to Trixie, in front of other ponies no less, and then Trixie would test whether the new line was again. So, do you like this? Fluttershy asked quietly. Of course Trixie does, Trixie replied. You are so soft. Trixie could stay like this forever. Fluttershy looked away, obscuring her face. Oh, I meant the spade. Oh, Trixie blushed. Yes, Trixie likes it. That's good. Peace and quiet. Trixie had nearly forgotten what it was like to just relax without the background noise of constant chatter. It was so pleasant, that Trixie was actually reluctant to break the silence, but she would have to soon. The last thing she wanted was to be walked in on midway through the conversation she was planning and watch Fluttershy clamp up. Of course, there was always a risk of Fluttershy doing that anyway, if Trixie approached it poorly. It figured that as soon as Trixie had a good opportunity to talk with Fluttershy, she didn't quite know how to phrase what she wanted to say. Granted, the longer she stayed quiet, the longer she could bask in the fact that she had Fluttershy literally in her grasp. That alone was a victory that made Trixie's insides turn to mush. Fluttershy coughed softly and looked toward the door. Sooner or later, Rarity was going to join them again, and then it would be too late. Trixie cleared her throat. Say, Fluttershy? Trixie really is having a good time, but how do you feel about doing something with just the two of us later this week? We can go out and do something fun together. Sure. Fluttershy smiled. If you're feeling confident in going out in public now, I'd be happy to go somewhere with you, Trixie. Something fun? Maybe, you'd like to meet another friend who can help? We could get something to eat at Sugar Cube Corner. I'm sure we'll find Pinkie Pie there. No, Trixie didn't mean. Wait, Pinkie Pie? Trixie paused briefly to consider the advantages of finally having a proper meeting with what so far had been just some sort of pink apparition. She shook her head. Never mind. No, Trixie meant just us, together. You know. A date? Oh. I'm sorry. I thought. What did you have in mind? Fluttershy swallowed nervously. Trixie took that as a yes and perked up. Great. Well, Trixie isn't quite sure what we're going to do yet, but something nice. She tried to sound confident despite the fact that she had been failing catastrophically at coming up with anything. It did not strike Trixie as likely that Fluttershy would have much to contribute, but she could really use any kind of direction. Do you have any suggestions? Suggestions? Fluttershy held a look as though she was asked to come on stage and wanted little more than to vanish from the spotlight. We could have tea, she offered. Trixie chuckled. Trixie is proud of you for trying. She winked, causing Fluttershy's face to vanish behind her mane. Curses. She thought Fluttershy was kidding, but perhaps that really was her first serious suggestion. Laughing at her was obviously the wrong thing to do. Trixie made a mental note to encourage Fluttershy the next time. It couldn't be easy for someone so shy to talk about this kind of thing. Do you have any other suggestions? Fluttershy shook her head. Trixie never wanted to let go, but she guessed Fluttershy would have an easier time recollecting herself if she withdrew for now. Reluctantly, Trixie let go of Fluttershy and moved a little bit away from her. The act earned her a brief, surprised glance from Fluttershy, which Trixie returned with a smile before she retreated again. It's okay. Trixie has a better idea. Trixie tapped her chin thoughtfully. Perhaps it would help if Trixie thought out loud. Fluttershy's ears perked up, which Trixie took to mean she had her curiosity. Looking away, Trixie leaned her head back against the edge of the bath and let herself sink down a bit further, getting nice and comfy while she mused. Gosh, if only Trixie could make up her mind. There's just so many things she'd like to do with Fluttershy, but Trixie can't be sure if she'd like any of them. A sideways glance revealed a confused expression on Fluttershy's face. Are you okay? Unperturbed, Trixie went on, seemingly staring up at the ceiling. A picnic sounds like a good idea, but Trixie already did that with Rainbow. And Trixie wouldn't want Fluttershy to think that Trixie cannot be more creative. Perhaps dinner at a restaurant? Too many ponies staring. The fact that she didn't have a bit to her name also didn't help that last one, but she wasn't about to admit to that. By now, Fluttershy was just plain staring. Oh, I see, Fluttershy brightened. These are all the things you've been thinking about? It has to be something she'd like. But Trixie doesn't know too much about nature, well, aside from what she's told her. Something peaceful would be a good bet though. As she spoke, Trixie sneaked a peek at Fluttershy and noticed she was smiling while she listened to Trixie. That has to be a good sign. Now then. Or maybe she'd like something completely different? What if Trixie tried to take her to the roller derby? Trixie offered, while keeping a close eye on Fluttershy. The idea was, of course, terrible. Trixie had known it would be, but what she really cared about was to see Fluttershy's reaction. The curious thing was that Fluttershy didn't stop smiling at all. She just sat there, listening to Trixie's silly suggestions without any negative response at all. Does she actually like roller derby? Trixie blinked. That couldn't be right and she knew it. Or maybe go hiking to that cave the dragon was in? Fluttershy still gave her just an encouraging smile. This wasn't working out at all like Trixie thought it would. Fluttershy was supposed to nod, shake her head, frown, or something. Anything that would give Trixie a clear indication what Fluttershy thought of her ideas, but instead she was just being polite. Trixie's shoulders slumped as she sighed dejectedly. Her little plan was useless and she just felt silly now. She couldn't just stop now though. She had to think of some way she could spin this so that wasn't completely ridiculous or she would look like a fool in front of Fluttershy. She threw out 2 more random suggestions to stall for time. Perhaps a visit to the city. Trixie's heard there is a shop that sells good muffins. Or maybe karaoke. Trixie stared at Fluttershy while she tried desperately to come up with some kind of excuse. What if Trixie said she was testing Fluttershy? Testing what? Think of something, curse you. Look at her, she's so adorable and she'll be expecting Trixie to have a good reason. Or maybe we should just stay in and read a nice book. She still hadn't thought of anything good. Trixie can't lose face like this. Speaking of face. Trixie actually noticed something shift in Fluttershy's during that last remark, but she looked just the same as before. Perhaps it was only her imagination? Trixie blinked, then did her best to look as if she wasn't staring while she spoke. Actually, Trixie might have had a good idea with the roller derby. It shouldn't be too hard to sign us up for it. For just a moment, it looked as though the corners of her mouth dropped a little then quickly pulled back up, but into a somewhat wider smile than before, almost as if to make up for the brief drop. At the same time, her eyebrows shifted downward a tad. Trixie was sure there were other subtle changes, but these were the ones she noticed this time. No, Trixie doesn't even know where to find a roller derby. Maybe we could go into the forest and try to spot some of the more skittish animals? This time, she clearly spotted the change on Fluttershy's face. This little back and forth game went on for a little while longer. Trixie was intentionally giving out both good and bad ideas to help her figure out the ridiculously subtle system that was Fluttershy's responses to each. Tiny eye twitches, a teeny change in breathing for half a second. It was maddening for Trixie, but oddly reminiscent of her younger days with Flitter. The changes in their expression were annoyingly subtle, but made the difference between a polite smile and a genuine one. Once Trixie felt pretty sure she could tell the difference more often than not, she ran a few ideas past Fluttershy that she wasn't sure about. Finally, Trixie ran out of ideas, and still, Rarity hadn't made her less than welcome entrance. Trixie wonders if that marshmallow got stuck to the spa table. Quake was pressing down on her pretty hard, like a s'more. The lightest of giggles from Fluttershy made Trixie realize she was still talking out loud. Might as well milk it while I can. Trixie gave Fluttershy a mischievous grin as she spoke. Oh well, at least Trixie has a pretty view like this all to herself. Fluttershy's now reddened face only spurred her on. Lips like those, it amazes Trixie that no pony else had ever tried to claim them. She inched closer to Fluttershy. Fluttershy in turn made an audible gulp and pressed against the back of the bath. Still, Trixie's face moved closer. For a brief moment, Trixie kept her muzzle inches from Fluttershy's own, noting how quick her partner's breathing had become. In that second, Trixie almost broke her word, but the knowledge of what it would do to Fluttershy's trust in her kept her back. Slowly, Trixie's muzzle worked its way around Fluttershy's face and to her ear. With a gentle breath which noticeably bristled the fur it touched, Trixie finished her teasing. Too bad Trixie promised not to. At least, for today. Unfortunately, the opening of the door signaled that their private time was over. Trixie quickly pulled away from Fluttershy, sloshing a bit of water over the edge as she leaned back against the tub again too quickly. Still, Trixie felt like she deserved to pat herself on the back for getting both a much better idea of what to do for their date, and some sense on how to read Fluttershy. Not to mention a bit of teasing. So sorry for the wait, girls. Rarity practically sang as she approached, levitating her robe open and stepping out of it as she neared the bath. I just had to talk to Lotus Blossom about, what was it, the new seaweed wrap treatment that they are introducing soon. Oh, it's going to be positively divine. She waded into the water. I hope you weren't having too much fun without me. We were just doing some thinking, Trixie replied cryptically. She could hear the hoof steps of the spa ponies clatter across the stone tiles behind her. Apparently every pony was deciding to come in all at once. Since you are here, Trixie is sure you can name what this part of the treatment is for. Rarity showed a superior smile. Ha, well I should think it would be obvious, but blah blah blah. Trixie found herself tuning Rarity out practically on reflex. It wasn't as if she actually cared in the slightest what the bath was for. While Rarity droned on, Trixie took the time to consider if Rarity really was just that into seaweed wraps that she'd take so long, or if she'd been interrogating the spa ponies about their interactions with Trixie. Each were plausible, but Trixie favored the latter explanation. Yet another show of how little the Pony apparently trusted her. Oh, what does Trixie care? Trixie has better things to do than to worry about her. Trixie could feel herself getting agitated again already. Her pulse was starting to beat like a drum in her temples, a clear sign to her that being friends with Rarity was going to be a lot easier said than done at this point. But at least the perfect pony to calm her nerves was right next to her. With just a little push, she floated the brief few hoof lengths over to Fluttershy and snaked one hoof around her waist beneath the water level. With a soundless gasp, Fluttershy's eyes widened, but she didn't make any effort to move away. Instead, she stayed perfectly still. Encouraged, Trixie gave Fluttershy a gentle squeeze. The feeling of having the soft, skittish mare in her grasp again was just what Trixie needed. Already she could feel her anger subside, and although her heart rate stayed up, it was for much different reasons. A curious tingling sensation enveloped Trixie, but what it was didn't register in her mind until much too late. Give the poor dear some breathing room, Trixie. Besides, I know a pony who might take it the wrong way were you to cling to her like that. Rarity's voice held a sufficiently colder tone that Trixie failed to tune them out like the rest of her droning. All at once, Trixie felt herself pulled away from Fluttershy by the magic that had surrounded her. It was so sudden that she didn't even think to put up any resistance as she found herself parked neatly by the edge of the bath, exactly evenly spaced out with the other two ponies. Channeling her magic, Rarity gave Trixie a disapproving look, as though she was disciplining a foal with a teat, while Trixie stared back completely bewildered. A silent moment passed between them before Rarity turned her attention to Fluttershy. "Ah, that reminds me, where is Rainbow Dash?" Trixie clenched her teeth as the entrapping magic faded away. It wasn't painful, or even very far, but this was the second time in as many days that Trixie was denied her liberty. First Twilight, and now Rarity. Why were they all so dead set on taking her happiness away? Her chest ached as she looked across the seemingly endless gulf that now was in between her and Fluttershy. Fluttershy, for her part, looked confused and conflicted by the whole thing, and she was only pulled out of it by the realization that she was being spoken to. Oh. Working, I think. Why? Was that a veiled hint that Rarity knew about Dashy too? Was she going to try to take everything away? Just who did these ponies think they were? Did they think they could do it because Trixie was weak? She wasn't weak. Maybe she'd have to make that painfully clear. Let's see Rarity or any pony else try to push Trixie around after this. While Trixie fumed, she spared a quick thought on what kind of horror she could bestow upon the diva to cement her superiority and keep the wretched mare out of her affairs. A sly grin played on her lips as she hit upon the perfect idea. Keeping one eye on Rarity, Trixie scooted up next to Fluttershy again. "Maybe we should visit her after this, Fluttershy," she said, shooting Rarity a taunting smile as she slid her hoof around Fluttershy's waist. Fluttershy looked nervously toward Rarity, presumably anticipating what reaction this would provoke. With an exasperated roll of her eyes, Rarity's horn sparked to life. Maybe I was too subtle. But before she could cast the full spell, Trixie zapped her horn with a small jolt, snuffing out the light that had been building there. Ouch! Rarity immediately reached her hooves up to soothe her aching horn. Trixie smirked with self-satisfaction, turning toward Fluttershy. "You were curious about unicorn magic, right? Well, like you said before, magic is really useful, but there are some drawbacks." Her wicked grin widened as she looked back to Rarity. "For starters, all magic uses the horn, and it's awfully sensitive when it's filled with magic. Isn't that right, Rarity?" Rarity glared in response and tried to charge up her spell once again. By the looks of things, she was still trying the same telekinesis spell that had shoved Trixie away the first time. The only difference was that this time she looked tenser, as though waiting for something. Just as quickly as before, Trixie lit up her horn, but this time Rarity tilted her head to swiftly move her horn away. Trixie merely aimed for her face instead, and zapped her again, making Rarity yelp and close her eyes, once more interrupting the spell. "Sorry, did Trixie break your concentration?" "Oh, you witch!" Rarity whined teary-eyed, rubbing the zapped cheek. Obviously, even a unicorn not as gifted as Trixie would realize to keep their horn safe, but that's no good if they can't deal with a little surprise. Trixie didn't even take her eyes off of Rarity this time while she addressed Fluttershy. It was just too much fun to see the ivory white face turn so sour. Maybe you should. I mean, maybe not." Fluttershy mumbled as she tugged on Trixie's foreleg. "Be at ease, Trixie has it under control," Trixie said while she patted Fluttershy. "Gathering energy for magic into one's horn takes time. The amount needed to move a pony through water is much more than to deliver a pinprick, so Trixie will always be faster. Of course, a pinprick like that isn't even good enough to pop a balloon, so it would only work on particularly precise unicorns," she added with a smirk as she glanced over at Rarity again. To Trixie's surprise, Rarity didn't look as though she was about to cry. Rather, she had a look of grim determination that really did not line up well with the diva persona she'd been putting on thus far. Without a word, the same sapphire glow sparked up again, but even slower than before. Although Trixie could tell the makeup of the spell was somewhat different, it was still very clearly a telekinesis spell. Deciding not to wait it out, Trixie simply zapped Rarity a third time, striking her other cheek, causing a curious ripple effect. Rarity flinched as she was struck, but she did not drop the spell again. Rapidly, Trixie loosed another 3 stings. The first one was as ineffectual as the other, while the other 2 were intercepted in mid-air by the growing cloud of magic that was now spreading out in front of Rarity and steadily encroached towards Trixie. "Can't catch your tongue?" Rarity said mockingly as she fed more magic into the cloud. "If you're not going to finish the lecture, I will. It only takes a little bit of magic to defend against those stings, and it is no trouble at all to start defensively, like feeding magic into a shield for example. Then you can take that same magic, and direct it to your original purpose. It's just slower." Trixie bit her lip. It was true, of course, but she hadn't expected some small-town gossip girl to know that. Techniques like that were usually reserved only for unicorns that had exceptional control of their telekinesis, like herself. How could Rarity do it? It didn't matter how. What mattered was she had to react quickly. Fortunately, Trixie had the benefit of not having to ward off any interruption attempts, allowing her to quickly build up a cloud of magic herself to meet that of Rarity halfway. Over the water between Trixie and Rarity, the orchid and sapphire telekinetic clouds clashed and pushed against one another in a contest of will, each one looking to consume, or roll over the other to reach their intended targets. How did she always end up in these situations? When Trixie got out of bed this morning, she hadn't expected she would get into a magic wrestling match. Despite her initial surprise, Trixie quickly realized this was an excellent opportunity to show off in front of Fluttershy. All she had to do was show Rarity her place again, and ignore the building pressure in her head. On another note, Rarity continued, the sensitivity of a horn is hardly just a flaw like Trixie seems to think. While it would be unladylike of me to say any more than this, a unicorn's horn is much the same as ruffling through a Pegasus' wings. A bit uncouth of an example, but I am a little pressed at the moment. Fluttershy, observing from the sideline, meekly offered her opinion. That's really, nice to know. This is pretty, but I don't think I'm that curious anymore. Yeah, you can stop now. Please. Trixie didn't pay much attention, she was too busy fending off Rarity as she poured more and more magic into the spell. Telekinesis was a basic spell, so Trixie was technically allowed to use it despite the fact that she was still recovering from her concussion, but the amount of magic she had to feed into it at this point just to keep up with Rarity had already pushed it several categories above her permitted level. The painful pounding in her head was back, making Trixie clench her teeth in a bid to resist the urge to cut her losses. Fortunately, Rarity appeared to have reached her limit and the sapphire glow didn't appear to be getting any stronger. Unfortunately, it wasn't getting any weaker either, and wouldn't until Rarity gave up or her magic reserve ran out. This was good, as it meant Rarity couldn't push any more than she was right now, while Trixie knew she was still capable of going higher. Just a little more. The orchid glow shone a little brighter still, and began to gain ground, devouring the sapphire as it went. Steadily at first, then faster and faster as Trixie kept increasing the spell's output. Trixie grinned while she watched Rarity lose more and more ground, sweat running down the pretty unicorn's face from the exertion. The only question now was what Trixie actually wanted to do with her, well, that, and what that warm feeling on her upper lip was. Briefly, there was a little popping feeling inside her head. Uh-oh. All at once, her head felt as though it was about to explode. The world suddenly became slanted, and the field of magic she'd been so carefully maintaining shattered, and Rarity capitalized on the opportunity, immediately making another magical grab for Trixie. For a moment all Trixie could see was the huge, semi-transparent fog of Rarity's magic bearing down at her. Then, she felt herself roughly jerked to the right. Despite a few sunspots, the world's colors returned, along with a very warm and soft feeling on the right side of her body. Rarity. Stop. Fluttershy pleaded as she held Trixie, having pulled her out of path of the incoming tidal wave of magic. Oh no, she's bleeding. Trixie, are you okay? She asked while she gently touched Trixie's nose, then pulled back with red stains on her fur. A broken nose? Rarity asked while she dropped the spell. But I haven't even touched her yet. Ah, not that I planned to. I mean, such barbarism just wouldn't be. Regardless, Aloe. Would you be so kind as to call a doctor? Yes, Miss Rarity. Doctor? But, Fluttershy's ears drooped. Yes. I think we better go back to the hospital, Trixie, she said while rising out of the water and offering Trixie a helping hoof out of the bath. Trixie's nose is fine, Trixie grumbled. Just a headache. Which was true, but still, even as she said that, she had a hard time taking her eyes off of the red patches of fur on Fluttershy's foreleg. That couldn't be good, but now that she wasn't using her magic, her head didn't feel as bad. Besides, Trixie couldn't put Fluttershy through another humiliation by admitting Trixie had gotten hurt on her watch again. Trixie just needs some air, and cut in. I'm not sure if. Doing her best to pull her gaze away from her own blood, Trixie looked into Fluttershy's eyes and gave her an awkward, but reassuring smile. Trixie promises you, it will be fine. She remembers our talk a few days ago. If this gets any worse, she will come right back to you and we'll go over to the hospital, but she thinks both of us would rather avoid that trip from happening if we can. Okay? Oh, okay. Fluttershy helped Trixie out of the water, but when she tried to follow, Trixie stopped her. Stay, Trixie will be right back. A little headache and a dizzy spell weren't enough reason to pull Fluttershy away from her spa treatment. She reached up to her nose in an attempt to keep the blood from trickling onto the clean floor too much. Fluttershy looked hesitant, but slowly nodded. I'd rather, but if that's what you want. She paused as Rarity put a hoof on her shoulder. Rarity shook her head. Come now, can't you see she's trying to save face by acting tough? Aloe, please go with her. She'll aimlessly roam around the building otherwise. Help her find some, cotton, was it? Can do. Aloe stepped towards Trixie and led her out of the room. Right this way, miss. A little bit annoyed, Trixie gave a short nod. It wasn't as though she could claim she'd find her way around in a strange place. Knitting her brow, Fluttershy watched Trixie slowly walk away on 3 hooves before glancing over at Rarity. Lotus, could you, maybe, help her too? If that's okay? I don't think. Lotus stopped speaking as Fluttershy briefly looked over at her before turning back to Rarity. She then quickly set down the basket of soaps she was holding. Certainly, Miss Fluttershy. I think we have a first aid kit in the lobby. We'll be back in 15 minutes or so. She trotted out to meet Trixie and Aloe and ushered them out the door a little faster than Trixie was comfortable with. With a bang, the double doors that led into the main bath area closed behind Trixie. She flinched. The loud noise didn't help her headache any. Gah, was that really necessary? What's the rush? Trixie's not in danger of dying. Though she might be if you keep trying to push her off her hooves like this. Oh. Lotus looked over at Trixie as though she'd momentarily forgotten she was there. A stab right in the heart of Trixie's pride. I'm so sorry, miss. It's just I felt it best we give them the room sooner rather than later. Trixie quirked her brow. Did you hit your head too? Lotus scowled a little, but said nothing of it. Either way. We'll go get that first aid kit. Actually, I'll do that. Aloe, go get a mop. And with that, she was off. Sure, Aloe set off in the opposite direction, but she paused briefly to examine Trixie. Are you sure you're okay? You don't look so hot. Trixie wanted to snap at the clueless tits. Even covered in blood, Trixie was sure she looked attractive, regardless of what this stupid mare thought. When Trixie didn't reply, Aloe gave her a gentle poke, causing Trixie to growl at her. Did she not think that maybe the trail of blood, Trixie's rapidly cooling soaked fur, and fluctuating headache might have killed her mood for stupid chit-chat? Was the insipid twit going to stand here and prod at her while Trixie bled herself lightheaded? Sadly, those last items on the list currently made her feel up to very little besides sinking through her hooves and taking a nice rest against the door. She just groaned and waved Aloe off with her hoof before closing her eyes.